just read a poem that I wrote today. That I did. On the bus, next to the woman who will probably bear my firstborn, he hops on. A bundle of joy, ecstatic just to be alive. On the bus with his grandfather. He is adorable, the perfect kind of adorable, the time right before a baby can talk, with cheeks full of goo-goos and gagas and laughter and smiles and God. We both turn to look to each other with awe at how his teeth and his hands and his feet are so tiny. Fascinated that these bones will extend. This skin will stretch, hair will lengthen, and lungs will amplify, and no one on the bus can hide their grin. A natural reaction to the supernatural, we're reminded of miracles. It is in this moment of so much tiny joy that I can't help but see hurt. Can't help but be disappointed at us, this country, this continent, this planet, to have planted so many seeds like this one, eyes of tomorrow, to break the promise in these babies' throats. It is here. I know millions of bundles exist, millions who fall victim because some people refuse to stand up to those crippling children like these before they can walk. It is here I see this boy, this smile, eating itself away on the face of children starving every night. I see offspring who won't see spring. I see the same cheerful glee from his esophagus like a waterfall. I see it dry out on tongues that are thirsty who can't drink water because companies like Coca-Cola control their country's water sources and force them to pay with their lives where they can't drink out of rivers or lakes because lakes are polluted with cholera, which kills them more than AIDS or malaria. I see him in every child in Japan where companies care more about nuclear power than 1/3 of their youth growing up with cancer. I see gas companies spilling oil in his Gulf. I see the glaciers in his eyes melt away with polar bears and ozone layers. I see U.S. drones killing lives like his. See McDonald's feeding off his poverty, serving him burgers and bullshit and lies. I see police shooting him down. See him labeled a criminal, labeled an alien, labeled anything but the child he is to everyone. And I wonder, when will the day come that kids like him with innocent blood feel alone on a planet with 8 million people and ask why? Then again, ask when people start to realize that this smile is all of our smile to protect here and abroad. That this bundle is ours to keep cheerful, to keep this tiny fist from worrying about being too small to fight for itself when we understand this profit isn't for profit. But this is the only thing worth saving. That was a poem I wrote this morning from town last night. I was just talking to her a few seconds ago about just how hard it is to know that so much hurt exists and so much oppression. It's hard to keep going. But when I see kids on the bus like this, and them not being able to, for all kids, it's like, oh shit. Oh shit. I'm a thug on the west side. But yeah, that we must continue to fight. So, I'd also like to read another poem. It's about Trayvon Martin. I'm writing a book, a chapbook, titled The Tale of Two Hoodies. The title of the book. This poem is also called The Tale of Two Hoodies. Um, yeah, but I did an event where I got a chance to meet Cornell West, and that was great. And I performed for him, but he told me, and I'll never forget, but justice is what love looks like in public. And and I don't know anybody who doesn't want to love that smile or that us, or anywhere. And that's what I truly believe will set the world in that right direction, is that, too many young, innocent lives are being taken. And it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter whether they're, you live in Israel and they're Palestine, or you live in Chicago and they're on the south side and they're black. These children are mine. So yeah, this is for Trayvon. It starts off with a quote. I am urging the parents of black and Latino youngsters, particularly, not to let their children go out wearing hoodies. I think the hoodie is just as much responsible for Trayvon Martin's death as much as George Zimmerman was. Gerardo Rivera. Ignore the Skittles. The taste of rainbow blood staining the teeth of wolves. Dressed in sheep's wool, the ones this country let loose on Matthew Shepard. Ignore the Arizona iced tea. We're learning how Arizona brews laws in a melting pot seasoned with undocumented exploitation. Let's start with a hoodie. Don't you know it ain't for no 50 to 70 degree weather? Don't you know youth with pigmentation colored any color but pure, supreme, pristine, white in a hoodie makes any elderly woman who watches television clench her purse, walk across streets, makes any store clerk eye sharp, any scrawny man on the train nervous, makes police aggressive, makes judges write sentences longer than them young folk can read. Don't you know, Trayvon, the intimidation and terrorism it brings? How responsible that hoodie was for your death. I must tell you the tale of your hoodie, how it has always been your enemy. Can't you see the noose hiding in your hood? How it's always been used to be tightened. How it's always been a scare tactic. A scarecrow named Jim, the coward he was, wore hoodies all the time, covered his face, burned the same cross his daughter thinks will protect her from you, used his string to lasso your neck. America feared hoodies before you, Trayvon, and they've always feared skin, not pure, supreme, pristine, white, challenging the privilege even more. See what I'm saying? We can't wear hoodies, not with our skin, especially when we use their scare tactics to flip it like a hood, make it ours. Let them know we are strong enough to dangle above this war on us, on drugs, on our hoods, our innovation. A tale entailed phobia they hadn't got over.
Supposed to be joined by a family member of Stefan Watts, who was a 15-year-old boy who was murdered by police in Calumet City in his home. Unfortunately, because of the situation that family is having to go through right now, things happen and they won't be able to join us. But I'm sure if you're not familiar with the case, I'm sure a lot of people will be able to bring it up in the discussion, and I know Britt has a few words to say about it. So we're going to go on to Britt next. So Britt Shawki she has organized in the past with the campaign to end the death penalty. Was very active in the case of George. Well, she was in the case of George Davis and was actually in Atlanta on the front lines fighting what was the eventual state murder of Troy. She has also been very active in the new Illinois campaigns and the new Jim Crow, which I'm sure she'll touch on. So here's Ms. Shawki.
Mello Trammell, since his love, Stefan's cousin, he's joined us at many rallies and demonstrations. He's been organizing we've been working with Stefan's family very closely, and we've been working with several other families. But there are countless other families who have yet to come forward and share their stories, and we are currently organizing to change that. We're here tonight to discuss mass incarceration and police terror specifically, but more broadly what we recognize as the system of the new Jim Crow. This talk, however, will not just focus on what is so horribly wrong with this system, but what we can directly do to overturn it. First, it is necessary to set the new Jim Crow in context by looking back historically at its roots coming out of the Jim Crow era and examining the origins of racism in this country. Racism is a particular form of oppression. It stems from discrimination against a group of people based on the idea that some inherited characteristic, such as skin color, makes them inferior to their oppressors. Yet the concepts of race and racism are modern inventions. They arose and became a part of the dominant ideology of the society and the context of the African slave trade at the dawn of capitalism in the 15 and 1600s. Now, in order to keep white indentured servants from uniting with enslaved blacks, a falsehood was crafted to keep them from seeing their common enemies, the landlords and the slave owners. Though the degrees of enslavement were obviously different, the fact remained that it took the institutions of the day adopting a newly invented racist rhetoric to keep revolts at bay, revolts that had been multiracial prior to the propagation of this new racist rhetoric. Poor whites were made to believe that blacks were somehow less than people, and therefore undeserving of basic human rights. This fostered ignorance of each other's plight and a reluctance to integrate a fight back, as it once was. Religious leaders, politicians, and the rich all played key roles in establishing the roots of racism in this country. American planters who saw that profit could be made off of keeping an enslaved workforce permanently. And after establishing that African slaves could cultivate major cash crops on the North American colonies, the planters then moved to establish the institutions and ideas that would uphold white supremacy. Most unfree labor became black labor because blacks are cheaper bought than white immigrant servants. And the laws and ideas that intended to underscore the subhuman status of black people that was being invented, in a word, this ideology of racism and white supremacy emerged full-blown over the course of the next generation. Now, Marx had this to say about the effects institutionalized racism had on the labor movement. He said, "In the United States of America, every independent workers' movement was paralyzed so long as slavery disfigured part of the republic. Labor in a white skin cannot emancipate itself where it is branded in a black skin." The institution of chattel slavery was so much the foundation of American society that it took a bloody civil war with 600,000 plus dead to uproot it. The war ended slavery, but not racism. We had abolition, but now what? That challenge, the challenge of uprooting racism, was the goal of the Reconstruction period. This period ultimately failed, and in the end gave rise to the Jim Crow era. Jim Crow is what we classically understand as enforced poll taxes, grandfather clauses, all-white juries, segregation of public space, and KKK rallies sponsored by the very towns that they wreaked havoc on. In the mid-20th century, fight back arose, demanding integration, equal opportunities for employment, fair and equal pay, and access to quality education. The civil rights movement dealt a tremendous blow to legal manifestations of Jim Crow racism. The civil rights movement is often talked about. It gets bandied about in classrooms across the country. However, its roots are not. The groundwork laid for the civil rights movement can be traced back to the work of integrated, radical progressive organizations in the Depression era that challenged the platitudes of the Jim Crow South as well as de jure racism in the rest of the country. Organizations such as the American Communist Party, the African Blood Brotherhood, the Socialist Workers' Party, and Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, although flawed in many ways, all organized around the principle that the institutions of this country were literally built on the back of black people and the poor, and as such, these institutions were inherently racist at its core. They maintained that these institutions could not be reformed, but rather they must be toppled, destroyed, done away with. It was this perspective that enabled these organizations propagated by mostly profit motives. It can be especially seen within the cruel era of the new Jim Crow that we are living in, where the prison industrial complex and police terror continue to disproportionately affect poor people and people of color. Michelle Alexander, author of the new Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, has this to say. The clock has been turned back on racial progress in America, though scarcely anyone seems to notice. All eyes are fixed on people like Barack Obama and Oprah Winfrey, who have defied the odds and achieved great power, wealth, and fame. Now, in this quote, Alexander points out that the masses of working-class African Americans are being relegated to the status of a racial caste, and although the official approach to dealing with minority communities has been redesigned to avoid explicit use of racial attributes. According to Alexander, the forms of racial control evolve as required by changing political periods and contemporary standards, within the current criminal justice policies now replacing the Jim Crow laws, which in turn had replaced slavery. Instead of mass lynchings by vigilante racists like the KKK, we now have state-sponsored murder, seen in every act of terrorism committed by police, and with the death penalty still in effect in many of our states. Of course, I say instead. However, as we all know what happened to Trayvon Martin in Florida, and hundreds more around the country, these vicious attacks are clearly modern-day lynchings. The old and new Jim Crow systems originated under parallel political and social circumstances, in both cases following major liberating upheavals, the Civil War, and the Civil Rights Movement respectively. The white ruling class was able to forestall economic and other reforms by redirecting this anger and hostility of the vulnerable and bias-inclined white lower classes away from themselves, the rich, and away from the system that served the interests of them, the privileged, toward an easy-to-identify, separate, and already scapegoated racial minority. Now, Michelle Alexander in her text highlights several major components that make up the new Jim Crow system, and it is important to go through them and to take the time to examine them and see how they intersect to form this incredibly insidious web of disenfranchisement. But, however, since we want to have ample time for discussion, I'm going to be covering two major forms that the new Jim Crow takes within our current criminal justice system: police terror and mass incarceration. To begin with police terrorism, in her latest piece for Socialist Worker, journalist Keeanga writes, "Police operate in black and brown communities as if the Bill of Rights does not exist, randomly stopping people for no reason, conducting searches without consent, and arresting and holding people with no charge. It is also infuriating because they operate with impunity. It is next to impossible to have a dirty cop charged with a crime or even disciplined for illegal or unethical behavior because the cops police themselves." Now, as Carlos had mentioned, there's going to be several different announcements, and one of those is going to be involving a petition from one of our allies in New York, Jazz Hayden, a well-known black radical and militant who's being persecuted by the city of New York on these trumped-up police harassment charges. So definitely be looking for that one. Jazz is not shy to injecting the term police terrorism into his work, and I think that that makes him a target for this. And I think that we have to follow in Jazz's footsteps, right? We can't afford to shy away from terms like police terrorism. We must call it what it is. When we hear stories and daily incidents of bigoted violence that so many of our brothers and sisters of color experience at the hands of police, to not call it terrorism is to ignore the brutal reality that we actually have to confront. When on average, every 40 hours, a person of color is shot and murdered in this country, to call it any other word than terror would pale in comparison and disrespect and insult what's actually happening in this country. Keeanga continues saying, "Police terror may be a permanent feature of the system that is as economically unequal and unjust as this one, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make incarceration is a direct result of police terror, harsh sentencing, and the draconian drug laws that all come dripping from head to foot in this country with racism. The unrelenting racial inequality which has created what Michelle Alexander considers a new caste system is hidden from view, almost invisible as a caste, due to the media-condoned mass of rationalizations. By mass incarceration, she means the criminal justice system together with a larger web of laws, rules, policies, and customs, racial stigmatization, and permanent marginalization to which it serves a gateway. The members of this new undercaste, once released from prison, face a whole what she calls hidden underworld of legalized discrimination and permanent social exclusion. The war on drugs alone in this country has had a devastating impact on the African American communities and on a disproportionate scale with the actual dimensions of criminal activity taking place within these communities. In less than 3 decades, the U.S. prison population has exploded from 300,000 to over 2.4 million persons caught up in this system. Most of these convictions coming from drug offenses, non-violent offenses. And this is resulting in the world's highest incarceration rate, ironically exceeding the rates of a number of regimes strongly criticized by the U.S. government as being highly repressive. This number is higher than the number of enslaved men in 1850 at the height of child slavery. To add insult to injury, many of these mega prisons are built on former plantation land in the South. And prisoners are expected to work for pennies on the dollar, if anything at all, producing household goods that end up on Walmart shelves. The prison industrial complex is a truly reimagined slave labor for profit scenario, where poor whites and poor people of color must labor to turn a profit for the states, but mainly companies that house and run these barbaric places. Now, what's missing from this mainstream discourse around these issues is also the lack of acknowledgement of the war on the poor in this country. This austerity program propagated by Bush and now furthered by Obama offers no hope to the working class and poor people. With no decent job opportunities, no access to social services, actually no social services period because of all of the cuts, no affordable housing, no affordable health care, and the cops set on your heels. I mean, let's face it, like being poor in America, like will either get you locked up or it has you running for your life or killed just trying to survive in this system. What we need to inject in this mainstream discourse, what's really missing, is saying that the people of this country are not criminals. This system is. Capitalism has found different means to implement its Jim Crow policies of the past, but the disenfranchisement and violent racist ends are exactly the same. Whether you look at the practice of state-sponsored murder, as we talked about with the death penalty, whether you look at foreclosures and evictions, the educational apartheid that we are feeling in our bones here in Chicago, and the forced sterilization that continues to occur when poor women and women of color visit the doctor's office, it all adds up to an incredibly terrifying picture, doesn't it? I want to take some time to read some names off. So when I was doing research and looking up different cases to bring up, I really wanted to mention some of these names. So bear with me. Since January of this year, and these are only the reported killings, by the way. There's no way of knowing really the actual number. Donald Johnson, 21, in New Orleans. Dwayne Brown, 26, in Brooklyn. Angelo Clark, 31, in Little Rock. Stephen Rodriguez, 22, in Monterey Park. Christopher Cassane, 26, Cypress Hills. Atwayne White, 17, Brooklyn. Stephon Watts, 15, our next door neighbor, Calumet City. Ramarley Graham, 18, the Bronx. Manuel Loggins Jr., 31, San Clemente. Johnny Warren, 43, over in Dottom. Trayvon Martin, 17, Sanford. Raymond Allen, 34, Galveston. Justin Sitt, he was 20, also in Nolens. Dante Price, 25, Dayton. Melvin Lawhorn, 26, Kershaw County. Dallas, Texas, in the face of brutal police repression, rise up and audaciously march on police headquarters and demand answers around the executions of young Latino men from their communities. Police thought that they could deter these community members and outraged citizens with their rubber bullets, their riot gear, their attack dogs, and beatings. But the next day, people continued to protest police terror, and they came out the day after that, and the day after that, and they are still marching on police headquarters, and there are solidarity marches happening all over this country, and they continue to speak out against this racist violence. Across the U.S., we're seeing all communities organizing these marches, vigils, demonstrations, and organizing meetings to speak out against police violence and murder against African Americans and Latinos. At the center of much of this organizing, and this is really what I think is the key, are the family members of the victims of police murder who are bravely and heroically finding each other across the country, joining forces, and demanding justice and speaking out against this racist terrorism. The outpouring of protest and organizing in the response to the lynching of Trayvon Martin showed that the potential for a movement against police brutality, against the new Jim Crow, against all of it, is vast. New groups are forming every day. Every day we're seeing social networking sites pop up with new communities, reaching out with new and different Google groups, with listservs, trying to draw people in, trying to connect the dots between all of these different groups. And we need a fighting movement, right? One that draws from the lessons of those radical abolitionists, those radical organizers in the 1930s, and the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power movements, respectively. Nationally, the National Alliance of Parents Against Police Violence is formed to link families together and to facilitate solidarity actions around cases. Locally, the families of Keeanga Boyd, who is a 22-year-old woman who was walking home through a park and was shot in the head by a drunk white officer. I want all of you to know his name, Dante Servin. We have the family of Stephon Watts joining us, who is a 15-year-old autistic child who was executed in his own basement by two Calumet City officers because they felt threatened that he had a butter knife in his hand that was used to unlock the back door to that basement. They felt threatened. Those cops standing at the top of the stairs of the basement, looking down at a 15-year-old child with their guns. They felt really threatened by him. We're also joined by Howard Morgan's family, the railroad cop who was shot 28 times, mostly in the back, by 4 white rookie officers. And by the way, he's currently serving time for their attempted murder. We're also being joined by new family members and others who are now joining up and sharing these stories. One of these women is very close to my heart. Her name is Lowana Lampkins, and she's a police torture survivor under the Burge administration. And her son was also murdered by the police. And so this is her other son, actually, who spoke at our recent rally. Prince, he came out and was actually able to share his story about being incarcerated and his experience with police terrorism. And their family has been just like absolutely instrumental in getting the word out and just providing motivation and fire to the group. So I'm really thankful that more and more these families are coming out because they're hearing other stories and they're beginning to fight back. Their stories continue to inspire more people to come forward and join the struggle, and that's exactly what we need to do. We need to build that broad base and continue to grow these groups. The fact of the matter is that our brothers and sisters are being systematically hunted down. Black and brown people are being herded into prisons, and those that aren't face possible police terrorism every day. We have to face facts. Being a person of color in this country puts a huge target on your back. I want to touch on 2 recent cases before I wrap up, some that folks have probably heard about in the past days or so. Chantel Davis, this is a slightly older case. 23-year-old woman became trapped behind the airbag in her car after being pursued by police and coming to an abrupt halt in the middle of an intersection in Brooklyn. She was shot in broad daylight whilst trapped behind her airbag by police. She was handcuffed and dragged from her vehicle, and whilst laying in the middle of the street, bleeding to death, begging for an ambulance, police keeping bystanders at bay, not allowing anybody to help her. They went around collecting and confiscating surveillance equipment from surrounding stores and offering to buy cell phones off of bystanders to try to prevent what was being transmitted and being recorded and shown. We can also look at the case of Chavez Carter, who's a young black man from Jonesboro, Arkansas, who who was apprehended because he had missed a court date and they picked him up. And while sitting double-locked, handcuffed in the back of a squad car, he ended up shot in the right temple. He was left-handed. He ends up shot in the back of a police squad car, no broken glass. Somehow he got a gun after being searched multiple times and double-locked handcuffed. That's what the police are saying happened. He got a gun by them, clearly. And this left-handed man shot himself in the right temple. Both of these murders illustrate the lengths that the police will go to murder people of color, to protect their own, and to cover it up. Now, I'm a member of the International Socialist Organization, and a lot of us are comrades and allies in this room who are committed to the fight for Black liberation and against this horrible system of the new Jim Crow. And if you also feel a sense of outrage at the things that we've been talking about this evening and what is happening to our brothers and sisters, and you want to join a fighting organization and more broadly become committed to an anti-racist movement, to end police terror and racism altogether by getting involved with groups like the Illinois Campaign in the new Jim Crow, I am imploring you right now to do so. It is the time to get involved. It is necessary to get involved. There is no other course of action except to stand against this racist, bigoted violence that permeates and saturates our society. And we need you. We need everyone. We need you to be talking about these things, and we actually need you on the ground organizing and fighting against this. It's going to take a serious fight. It's going to take challenging the very foundations of this system. It's a task that was begun many decades ago and that we are unfortunately still waging. But it is a task that I believe that we are up to. And quite frankly, we have to be.